africanos y de la diáspora africana. Hoy tenemos una invitada especial y tenemos una conferencia muy especial. La conferencia Mujeres Africanas y Resistencia, o Resistencia de Mujeres Africanas, o Resistencia del Mundo Africano, presentado por la doctora Kimberly Monroe. El ciclo de conferencias de estudios africanos y de la diáspora africana ha sido creado para difundir el pensamiento africano centrado y panafricanista a través de las experiencias y los aportes de los africanos y sus descendientes alrededor del mundo. Es un espacio abierto y permanente donde se invitan expertos en diferentes áreas del conocimiento y donde el diálogo circunda en temas de interés colectivo y desde la perspectiva centrada en África, panafricana y anticolonial. Mujeres africanas y resistencia, o resistencia a las mujeres del mundo africano. En el continente y en la diáspora, las mujeres africanas tienen una larga historia de participación en múltiples formas de resistencia, tanto individual como colectiva, ya sea contra expresiones de patriarcado, de supremacía blanca, de esclavización o otras formas de injusticia. Los modos femeninos de resistencia, que son distintivos para las mujeres africanas, a menudo se institucionalizan en los sistemas culturales africanos tradicionales y desde donde siempre han creado formas de resistir a las fuerzas que las oprimen. Estas múltiples y variadas expresiones de resistencia son parte de los usos políticos y transformadores de las prácticas culturales y la cosmovisión africana. En esta conferencia, la doctora Monroe nos presenta su trabajo, nos presenta a las mujeres africanas o a las mujeres del mundo africano como agentes de la historia y actores políticos complejos. Ella nos guiará a través de expresiones individuales y colectivas de autonomía, agencia y resistencia de las mujeres del mundo africano. Déjenme les cuento un poco de la doctora Kimberly Monroe. Ella es nativa del sur de Luisiana, actualmente es profesora adjunta de Historia y Estudios Africanos en el Departamento de Asuntos Globales de la Universidad Trinity, en Washington. Ella creó la mención de estudios africanos en Trinity en el 2020. Esto es una concentración de estudios africanos dentro del Departamento de Asuntos Globales y va a empezar, su primer semestre va a empezar ahorita en el segundo semestre de 2021, ahorita en el otoño. Eso es uno de los grandes logros de la doctora Monroe, la creación de esta mención en ese programa. Ella es profesora de la diáspora africana, África moderna, historia afroamericana, historia de las mujeres negras y estudios de la mujer. Ella recibió su título de pregrado y maestría en Grambling State University. En Grambling State, I think, es una de las, ¿cómo se diría HBCU en español? Universidad Tradicional Afroamericana.
Históricamente, universidades y colegios históricamente negras.
Exacto, gracias. Y hizo su doctorado, su PhD en Historia de la Diáspora Africana y Estudio de la Mujer en la Universidad de Howard, que también es una universidad históricamente negra. Bueno, ella, antes de unirse a la Facultad de Trinity, ella fue profesora de medio tiempo en la Universidad del Distrito de Columbia, que es importante también, donde dio cursos en la Facultad de Humanidades y también ha realizado presentaciones y trabajos en Haití, en Ghana, en Tanzania y más recientemente en Senegal. Y ella, cuando estuvo en Senegal, estuvo trabajando en el Centro de Investigaciones de África Occidental en Dakar. Sus intereses de investigación incluyen el activismo de las mujeres africanas, el internacionalismo negro, el poder negro global, el panafricanismo, el movimiento de las artes negras y el hip hop en África, y actualmente forma parte del consejo asesor del próximo libro Black Freedom Struggles en Africana Reader, y que va a ser publicado por Kendall Hunt. The cycle of conferences of African and African diaspora studies have been created to disseminate Afrocentric and Pan-Africanist thought through the experiences and contributions of Africans and their descendants worldwide. It is an open and permanent space where experts in different areas of knowledge are invited. The dialogue revolves around issues of collective interest and from the Afrocentric, Pan-Africanist, and anti-colonialist perspectives. Africana women resistance. On the continent and in the diaspora, African women have a long history of engaging in multiple forms of both individual and collective resistance, be it against expressions of patriarchy, white supremacy, slavery, or other forms of injustice. Africana women distinctive female models of resistance are often institutionalized in traditional African cultural systems, from where they have always created ways to resist their oppressive forces. These multiple and varied expressions of resistance are part of the political and transformative uses of cultural practice and African worldview. In her lecture, Dr. Monroe introduces us to African women as agents of history and complex political actors. She will guide us through individual and collective expressions of autonomy, agency, and resistance of Africana women. Dr. Monroe is a native of Southern Louisiana. She's currently an assistant professor of history and Africana studies in the Global Affairs Department at Trinity Washington University. She developed the Africana Studies minor at Trinity in 2020 and a concentration in Africana studies within the Global Affairs Department to begin in the fall to 2021. She's a professor of the African diaspora, modern Africa, African American history, Black women history, and women's studies. She received her BA and MA, bachelor's and master's, from Grambling State University and PhD in African diaspora history and women's studies from Howard University. Before joining the faculty at Trinity, Monroe was a part-time lecturer at the University of the District of Columbia, where she taught courses in the humanities division, sorry. Kimberly has made a presentation and conducted research in Haiti, Ghana, Tanzania, and most recently in Senegal, where she was hosted by the West African Research Center in Dakar. Her research interests include Africana women activism, Black internationalism, global Black power, Pan-Africanism, the Black arts movement and hip hop in Africa, and now, currently, she serves as the advisory board for the forthcoming book, Black Freedom Struggle, an Africana reader contracted by Kendall Hunt Publishing. Dr. Monroe, that was a lot to say about you, and I know there's much to say, but I give you the chance for you to tell us. Welcome to Seattle, Dr. Monroe. I just have one recommendation. So since we have an audience that is, is all across the diaspora, as I said before, so Diana, our interpreter, the remarkable Diana. So she, please, just if you can break down the information in pieces, in chunks, so she can, just present, and you give her chance to interpret what you just present to us. And I will ask the audience, just for Dr. Monroe, so she knows where you guys are, where you're connecting from. If you can please drop your name, or at least where you're connecting from. And if you can, your occupation as well. Para la audiencia, si por favor, poner su nombre, o por lo menos de dónde se están conectando, ciudad y país, y si así lo desean, también la ocupación, para que todo el mundo sepa de dónde la están siguiendo y dónde la están escuchando. Muchas gracias. The mic is yours, Dr. Monroe.
Thank you so much, John and Seattle, for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation and to engage with each of you. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to pull up my notes with it as well.
Thank you. Take your time, Dr. Monroe.
Yeah. You all can still see my screen, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Okay, once again, thank you all for having me. I'm Kimberly Monroe, professor of Africana Studies and History at Trinity. I'm also a member of Pan-African Community Action. It's a grassroots organization here in Washington, D.C., where we focus on community control over the police here in the D.C. area. So I definitely wanted to make mention of that.
If you allow me, I'm going to translate, Dr. Monroe.
Yes.
La doctora Monroe se ha presentado, agradece al público por tenerla hoy y por esta participación en este evento, y también quería remarcar que aparte de ser profesora de la Universidad Trinity en Washington, también es parte de el movimiento colectivo Acción Panafricana Comunitaria, que es una ONG a nivel comunitario que participan como en temas de veeduría de la policía en Washington, D.C.
So before I start off, I always draw strength from my ancestors. I truly believe that without them, I would not be in the position that I'm in any way because of their resistance and resilience. And so today, just honoring my great-great-grandmother, Felicia Senegal, who has had roots in Senegal, West Africa, because of the research that I'm currently doing. I definitely wanted to share that. And this is her in the middle with my mother and her other great-grandchildren. And so I just want to pay homage to her and to ask her to come into the space to provide me with guidance and protection as we have this conversation.
Y la doctora Monroe quiere hacer énfasis que ya antes de empezar cualquier tipo de conferencia y panel, y en particular hoy, quiere empezar derribando esa fortaleza de sus ancestros, llamarlos y darles el agradecimiento por permitirle a ella este espacio, por su resistencia y su resiliencia, que inspiran esta conferencia para ella, en particular a su bisabuela, gran bisabuela, disculpen, la señora Felicia Senegal, y nacida en Luisiana, con raíces en África Occidental, que le ha proporcionado a ella, y ella pide que le proporcionen la guía y para realizar esta charla hoy con ustedes.
So Africana, and I know Diana, you wanted to talk about this as well, is a term that we use to describe African descendants throughout the African diaspora. So John Henry Clark stated that Black or Blackness tells you how you look without telling you where you are, whereas Africa or Africana relates you to land, history, and culture. So that's just a tidbit. So people use it interchangeably, Africana, African, and Black, but it does have a significance to cultural roots, which is why we use the terminology. And you can say that and I'll go to the next point.
Okay. Queríamos hacer un énfasis al comenzar esta conferencia en el término africana. En particular nos referimos al mundo africano. Muchas veces se intercambian las palabras la negritud, negro, negra, con el término africano, africana, pero hay un significado distintivo entre estas dos palabras. Como dijo John Henry Clark, la negritud es decir, dice quién eres, pero africana, africano, significa de qué tierra eres, tu historia y tu cultura. Entonces hay un significado distintivo, y como el término no es traducible exactamente en español, entonces vamos a referirnos al término cuando se refiere a africana, al mundo africano.
And since we're having a conversation about Africana women, about Black women, African women throughout the diaspora, I want to draw from two valuable frameworks, ideologies. The first is Clenora Hudson Weems, who coined the term Africana womanism, and it's intended to include women of African descent, as opposed to frameworks like feminism, Black feminism. She believes in self-naming, which is an African, something that we draw from daily in our African traditions. And then also non-aligned, because many of the women that I talk about in terms of their ideologies may not align with any ideology that is included in the woman feminism umbrella or conversation. So I definitely wanted to include that.
Bueno, la doctora Clenora Hudson Weems fue quien instó el término mujer africana, o conocido en inglés como Africana womanism, y ese término es muy diferente a hablar del feminismo o el feminismo negro, porque comprenden lo que es también hablar de la mujer negra como tal, y incluye a todas las mujeres que son de la diáspora africana o descendientes de el continente africano. Y está marcado, y sus raíces son de la cultura africana y del afrocentrismo, enfocadas en las experiencias, las luchas y las necesidades de las mujeres del mundo africano y de la diáspora africana.
Yes, and I also wanted to make mention that non-aligned is a term that was created by the scholar Dr. Valethia Watkins, and it's really to talk about the ways that many feminist scholars talk about our African women leaders in the context of feminism, and she goes against that. So I wanted to make mention of that, and I put it in the chat as well.
Hay algo también que queremos recalcar, es que muchas veces el término, el feminismo es puesto a la vez con las mujeres africanas del mundo africano, y la doctora Clenora Hudson Weems hace una distinción de que no mezclar esos dos términos, ¿no? Entonces, para que tengamos eso en cuenta, no están alineados en esta charla.
Thank you. And the African diaspora, right? The very concept that brings us all here in this space is described as a triadic relationship linking a dispersed group of people to the homeland, Africa, and to their host or adopted countries. And so within the African diaspora, some of the themes, of course, include migration, both voluntary and involuntary, but it also includes themes of African retentions and Africanisms. So through language, religion, food, music, and definitely resistance. And so that is just kind of leading us into this conversation about African women and resistance throughout the diaspora.
En pensar en la diáspora africana, pensamos en una relación, un concepto tripartidista, que es un enlace entre los grupos dispersos de sus diferentes tierras del continente africano o sus países adoptivos, de donde son. Y en lo que nos une como diáspora es entre las lenguas, nuestra gastronomía y ante todo la resistencia como pueblo.
Yes, and it's also important to mention that the scholars Herskovits and Fraser had a debate that Africans throughout the diaspora did not retain their culture, their history, when they were brought to the New World. And so what we've seen throughout these past years with these themes of resistance, with religion, like the Lukumi and others, that we have retained many parts of our African heritage.
Dos académicos en particular que remarca la doctora Monroe son Fraser, sorry, Dr. Monroe, and how do you pronounce the other one?
Herskovits and E. Franklin Fraser.
Herskovits y Franklin Fraser, que argumentan que la diáspora africana no mantuvo su cultura y su historia al ser esclavizada en los países que ya conocemos, pero ella argumenta que esto no es el caso. Es notable en la religión, en lo que se han mantenido los rituales, por ejemplo, Lukumi, y en la retención de nuestras lenguas, y la herencia, ante todo la herencia africana, es muy presente en la diáspora.
Thank you. So in talking about Africana women and resistance, of course, we have to we can't go all the way back in history, but I think it's important to note that when Europeans arrived to parts of West Africa, you know, these colonial rulers shifted the traditional functions of African societies and ultimately challenged women's powerful roles as queen mothers, wealthy merchants, you know, spiritual leaders, and participants, and them being participants in resistance and nationalist movements. And so this is kind of the conversation that Cheikh Anta Diop talks about in pre-colonial Africa, where he's describing African women in very powerful roles, but this was shifted when Europeans arrived and tried to dismantle some of the structures in place.
Cuando se habla de mujeres africanas, del mundo africano, pensando en esa África precolonial, sabemos que las mujeres africanas tenían un rol como lideresas, incluso reinas de la realidad africana, pero cuando, claro, llegaron los europeos en su colonización, cambiaron esas estructuras a su modo y quitaron ese poder, ese empoderamiento de la mujer africana, transformaron esa estructura, y lo que hoy se conoce no es ese mundo precolonial africano de la mujer empoderada y de su resistencia.
And so African and African diaspora social structures can be traced to the structure of capitalism and slavery, which removed Black women from their means of production and from their productive functions. And the scholar Philomena Steady talks about African women talking about their husbands, their uncles, the men in their lives as part of the human same. And so when we talk about pre-colonial Africa of African men and women, there was always a balance. It was never truly a hierarchy in terms of how they thought about their roles in society, in their homes. And so she talks about that because there were women in high positions as chiefs, monarchs, etc.
La académica Philomena Steady remarca sobre cómo las mujeres africanas en estos tiempos precoloniales no existían jerarquías, había un balance entre los géneros, como ustedes saben, eran monarcas, eran jefes de sus tribus, y ese balance existía, y por lo cual cuando se ve la diáspora africana, aquellas mujeres pierden cuando se cambian esas estructuras, ese valor, ese balance que había, porque la diáspora africana estaba centrada en la esclavitud y el capitalismo, ¿no? Entonces esas estructuras se han cambiado, pero remarcamos nuevamente en lo que era tiempos precolonial y ese balance que existía.
Yes. So African women had autonomy, had agency, and had lost that because of European arrival, but we're seeing over the years how Black women African women have inserted themselves in political and nationalist movements throughout the world. So I'll go to the next slide.
Como ven, o sea, las mujeres africanas siempre han tenido autonomía, agencia, ese liderazgo de sí misma, y aunque lo perdieron con ese cambio de estructura por la colonización europea, sí lo volvemos a ver en los movimientos nacionalistas, en ellas ser las líderes de estos movimientos, retomando ese valor, esa fuerza y ese liderazgo.
Yeah, so as we talk about resistance, it is an African retention, something that is ingrained inherently in both Black men and women throughout the African diaspora. Africans throughout the world, in the New World and other spaces, had to create various ways to resist their oppressive forces like white supremacy, slavery, et cetera. So many times we think of warfare as a way to fight back, but there are also ways in which African women resisted in terms of infanticide. If anyone have read Toni Morrison's Beloved, it talks about that. Suicide, Igbo's Landing is an example. Just anything to remain in bondage. And also religious practices. I mentioned the Lukumi, Ife, Orisha tradition, mostly, connected to Yoruba, but it's in other parts of the world as well, which is considered a resistance against, traditional Christianity. I don't want to say too much, Diane.
No worries. Thank you. También cuando hablamos de resistencia, en pensar en la diáspora africana, también esa resistencia se refiere a ambas mujeres y los hombres de la diáspora, que tuvieron que crear nuevas maneras de resistencia, y en ese imaginativo tendemos a pensar que resistencia es solo guerra o un movimiento no pacífico, pero no, hay otras maneras de resistir. Como hemos visto, la doctora Monroe hace mención al libro Beloved de la escritora Toni Morrison, en la cual ella habla de infanticidio y las prácticas religiosas que utilizaban estas mujeres. Por ejemplo, para resistir, se habla también del suicidio como una manera de resistir a la esclavitud, al estar atados a algo que no. George, can you assist me with the translation of bondage?
Let me see. They're translating bondage as esclavitud.
Okay. Bueno.
O ser cautivo.
Bondage también significa estar en una condición de cautiverio.
Ahí estamos.
Sí, cautivo. No prisión realmente, pero cautiverio, a la fuerza y todo lo que viene. O sea, es esclavización obviamente, pero es cautiverio también.
Cautiverio.
Y bondage también se refiere mucho al uso de fuerza como los grilletes y todas esas cosas, todas las cosas que pusieron, las carimbas, los grilletes. That refers to bondage too.
You can proceed, Dr. Monroe. I wanted to make sure that we were making that distinction using the correct term.
Absolutely. So in terms of resistance, the most well-known way that we know is through physical resistance and fighting back. And so when we talk about Maroons, when we talk about women like Harriet Tubman and others, it's within that conversation. And so, of course, we reference the transatlantic Black liberation struggles, the Haitian Revolution, the slave revolts, anti-colonial fights, African independence movements, and even today with anti-neocolonial struggles that we are continuously fighting. The most well-known way that we know of resistance is through physical resistance. And so we have always resisted oppressive forces. Again, talking about Harriet Tubman in the US, or Ya Satua, who I will talk a little bit about on the next slide. I think it's important to have those conversations, to not believe what Fraser believed in terms of our history and our culture not being retained.
Cuando hablamos de resistencia también, pues hay que hablar de la resistencia física ante las fuerzas opresivas, y mencionamos a Harriet Tubman en Estados Unidos, allá a Satenwa en la región Ashanti, en Ghana, o la reina Nani en Pereza Taitú. Hablando de resistencia también pensamos en los movimientos anticoloniales en Haití, de independencia, ante todo. Entonces también en ese contexto, esta es una respuesta a lo que fue la esclavitud, la institucionalización de la esclavitud y el racismo y el colonialismo.
Thank you. And, Philomena Steady wrote that in response to the various institutions of enslavement, colonialism, imperialism, and racism, Black women's resistance has taken various forms, ranging from passive resistance to protest to direct military confrontation. And so examining the impact of Black women, not only as being oppressed in their own sense, but through a collective struggle, it really highlights them as strong, resourceful, and willing to challenge governments. So I wanted to make mention of that as well.
Bien, hablando de la resistencia, hemos visto la resistencia de diferentes maneras, una resistencia pasiva, una resistencia en forma de protesta, también en confrontación militar y el rol de la mujer en esa resistencia como recursivas y retando a esos gobiernos, a esos gobernantes dentro de esa resistencia.
So African women, Africana women challenged their systems of governments to protect their communities. And one of the persons that I want to highlight today, because there are many women that we can talk about, many African women, but I definitely want to shed light on Yaa Asantewaa from West African Ashanti region. She was queen mother of the Eweso tribe of the Ashanti, now modern day Ghana, and she led an army of thousands against the British colonial powers in an effort to protect the golden stool. And the golden stool for Ghana represents power, and the Asante Hen, who was the king of the Kumasi area and other parts of Ghana, sits on that stool, and the British wanted it. So she led an army to resist, right? To protect their culture, but also to resist colonial powers.
Hay muchas mujeres africanas de las que les puedo hablar, pero quiero en particular hacer énfasis en la reina Nani de los cimarrones. Las mujeres usaban la resistencia ante sus gobernantes para proteger a sus comunidades, y ella en particular resistió ante el poder colonial de los británicos, de los ingleses, protegiendo en su comunidad en Ghana, lo que conocemos hoy en día como Ghana, en la tribu Ashanti, George.
Yeah,
stool.
take your time, Diana. You're doing great.
What word do you need help with?
Golden stool, the word stool.
Es un banco.
Un banco, sí, lo que consideran un banco de oro, y para la cultura Ashanti era un símbolo de unidad y soberanía. Entonces, la Queen Nani protegió eso y lideró a un grupo de mujeres a resistir a todo un ejército, a resistir contra eso y proteger eso que para ellos era ese símbolo, y ese símbolo de soberanía, y resistir contra esos poderes coloniales.
Okay, so the golden stool is the symbol of unity and sovereignty, and it is really considered an important, artifact for the Ghanaians. And Asantewaa is quoted saying, "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight the white men." And so in this conversation, it's showing that the men were not willing to stand up and fight the British on behalf of the golden stool and their sovereignty and unity symbol.
Voy a hacer una corrección. Me estaba yo refiriendo a la reina Nani de los cimarrones, y no es la reina Nani, es Yaa Asantewaa, me está adelantando, quien fue la que lideró este ejército, y de hecho el ejército fue conformado solo por mujeres. Los hombres no quisieron defender este tesoro del de la monarquía Ashanti. Entonces volvemos a remarcar el nivel de resistencia, empoderamiento y el liderazgo de las mujeres.
So she was captured and she was incarcerated on the other side of the continent in Seychelles, where she later died. But I was able to get this photo here of her in her older age next to this stool when I was in Ghana a few weeks ago at the Kumasi Museum. And so it just tells us a little bit about her, but it also shows her there. And so that was, for me, that was an important photo to take, even though I wasn't supposed to. And then that's just a monument of her in Kumasi.
Esta es una foto de ya Santo ya en su edad, en su edad como adulto mayor. Ella fue, lastimosamente, sí fue capturada y puesta en cautiverio al otro lado del continente, en las islas de Seychelles, donde murió. Y la doctora Monroe rescató esta foto en Ghana, en un viaje a Ghana, aunque no estaba supuesta a tomar la foto, pero la quiso tomar para tener ese recuerdo y esa imagen de esta mujer empoderada, esta lideresa. Y al lado vemos la estatua que hoy en día se encuentra en, permítame, can you repeat the city where the statue is, Dr. Monroe?
Kumasi.
Kumasi.
Kumasi, la capital de los Ashanti.
So there are many other African women to highlight, of course. I saw someone talk about Queen Nzinga or Njinga, the book that talks about her position in Angola. There are also, Bibi Titi Muhammad, who's an African nationalist with Julius Nyerere, Empress Beitul, who was very central in Italy's potential invasion of Ethiopia. She was able to read the treaty in Italian and know that they were trying to, invade. And so she was a part of the War of Adwa. And the list goes on. Queen Kahina, who was in North Africa, fought against the Arab inclusion in North Africa during the 7th century. There are many women that we can draw from to support the struggles that we continue to fight today.
Hay una lista larga, extensa de mujeres africanas que podemos resaltar, y entre ellas se resalta la reina de Angola, Ngazi, varias emperatrices, entre esas una que ayudó durante la Primera Guerra Mundial en Italia a liderar movimientos. Ahí la emperatriz Saitu Betul de Etiopía, que fue clave en el conflicto sobre el Tratado Buchal en Italia y marchó en la batalla de Adwa para defender a Italia en 1896. También tenemos múltiples líderes africanas donde podemos derribar lo que continúa a ser una resistencia de la mujer del mundo africano de África.
And so another major important figure, and I should also say that when I was in Ghana in May and visited the last bath in Ascend My Soul, there are photos of African revolutionaries throughout the diaspora. And there were photos of certain women. And one of those was Queen Nanny. The other was Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Anna Julia Cooper. And it was important for me to see that, to show that we are in many ways in solidarity with our struggles. And we know the history of those struggles wherever we are. Diana, I don't know.
Yes. One sec, so I was writing down to translate.
Oh, okay.
queremos recalcar, y qué pena, volvemos a la reina Nani de los cimarrones, que yo me equivoqué en el slide anterior. Y en mayo, la doctora Monroe estuvo en Ghana y tuvo la oportunidad de ir a un museo, y en ese museo habían fotos de revolucionarios africanos, y entre esas fotos se encontraba la de la reina Nani, y también fotos de otras mujeres de la diáspora, incluyendo a Harriet Tubman, que ayudó en el movimiento para sacar a los esclavos aquí en Estados Unidos a las partes que eran libres. También de Claudia Jones, y al igual, so the photos are from Claudia Jones, Harriet Tubman, and what other leader? What other empowered female?
Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Queen
Sojourner
Nanny,
Truth.
and Anna Julia Cooper.
Y Anna Julia Cooper y Sojourner Truth. Entonces, para la doctora Monroe esto fue un hallazgo importante, porque recalcó de que nosotros como diáspora y también en el continente conocemos nuestra lucha en conjunto, no es una lucha aislada de solo liderazgo africano, el continente africano, pero estamos todos conectados, y saber que esa solidaridad existe, y reconocer nuestra historia a través de la diáspora.
Yeah, so a Maroon is a member of any of the various communities in parts of the Caribbean and parts of Southern America as well, who were originally descended from escaped slaves in the 18th century Jamaica. I think it's important to note that Maroons fought 2 wars against the British settlers, both which ended with treaties affirming the independence of the Maroons. And so Maroons continue the idea, the concept, the practice of resistance and African retentions, and in a similar way that we continue to struggle for land, for freedom, and for our communities, and to control our own communities, so self-determination. And so most people are familiar with Gaspar Yanga, who was an African leader of a Maroon colony in the Veracruz Highlands. But Queen Nanny is also a very popular figure of the Maroon communities who we rely on today in terms of talking about African women, Africana women resistance. And she was well known for delivering her guerrilla warfare tactics to that community that are still used today by many militaries around the world. And so Queen Nanny and others, were a part of these very important wars against the British in those spaces.
Cuando hablamos del cimarronaje, sabemos que nos referimos a un miembro de, you could go up please on Maroon, the definition.
Previously incarcerated, previously in bondage, Africans who descended from slavery, who escaped those spaces to create their own communities.
Bueno, un cimarrón es un miembro de varias comunidades, entre esas del Caribe, que descendieron de esclavos que lograron escapar. Recalcamos en el periodo, en el siglo XVIII en Jamaica, que fueron tratados que fueron firmados, que afirmaron la independencia de los cimarrones. Y aún esto sigue siendo como un ejemplo de lo que seguimos como pueblo de diáspora, como la diáspora africana, peleando por nuestras tierras, por nuestra libertad y nuestra autodeterminación. También recalca la doctora Monroe sobre Gaspar Yanga en Veracruz, un líder africano de la colonia del Cimarrón, y a quien la reina Nani le ayudó en su propia resistencia con sus tácticas militares, que hoy en día aún se utilizan. Entonces recalcamos nuevamente el liderazgo y la resistencia a la mujer del mundo africano, de la mujer africana hoy en día como recalca la doctora Monroe, aún se utiliza sus estrategias y sus tácticas militares.
Also want to make mention of Claudia Jones, who was born in Trinidad, West Indies, migrated with her family to New York, where she joined the Young Communist League, but was radicalized by the Scottsboro Boys case. Arrested for the first time, of course, by practicing communism, and is an important figure to this idea of Black internationalism, Black communism, and in terms of resistance, she was a part of these movements in many ways during the 1940s and even up until the 1950s when she was deported to London, where she also joined the communist community there. She was a journalist. She founded the West Indian Gazette, Afro-Asian Caribbean News, but also the creator of the Notting Hill Carnival, which is, considered the Caribbean Carnival in London.
También queremos destacar a Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones nació en Trinidad y Tobago, llegó a Estados Unidos, se radicalizó con uno de los casos de Scottsboro, de los niños de Scottsboro, llegó a Nueva York en 1924, se unió al Partido Comunista en 1933 y a la Liga de Comunistas Jóvenes, y fue arrestada por primera vez en 1948 por su activismo, y en 1951 fue deportada en 1955 a Londres, donde ahí ella fundó el Gazette de West Indian Gazette y el periódico, ella era periodista también, el periódico Afroasiático Caribeño, 1958, y la fundadora de Notting Hill Riot, conocido como el Carnaval caribeño del Caribe, en un carnaval muy famoso, muy reconocido en Europa, en Londres. Y lastimosamente falleció en 1964. Pero una mujer que pese con su resistencia siguió luchando y dejando un legado.
So Claudia Jones is a vital person to include in the conversation about Africana women and resistance, mainly because of her contributions of including working class women within the conversation. Because later on, when we get to the civil rights movement, it mainly deals with a certain class of Black women in those conversations. But she brings working class women within this conversation, mainly because of her own background of, working class in New York, but also her work during this time period in connection to other activists like Paul Robeson, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and others who she considered very close friends, even during her time in London. And so we include her in the conversation because of her thinking, because of her ideology, and in terms of communism. And, you see the book here, Left of Karl Marx. In London, she's buried literally left of Karl Marx. And that's always something interesting to include in the conversation because she's buried in the cemetery directly left of Karl Marx, which I think really shows. Oh, go ahead. I'll say that.
It's okay. Go for it. Quisiera destacar a Claudia Jones en particular, no solo por sus contribuciones políticas y como su liderazgo, pero también la contribución que ella tuvo en incluir a la clase trabajadora, a las mujeres de la clase trabajadora. Esto vamos a ver durante el movimiento de los derechos civiles en Estados Unidos. Hay una distinción que se hace. Esa lucha fue marcada por un cierto tipo de personas de cierta clase, ¿no? Y entonces destacamos la contribución de Claudia por su trabajo con otros activistas, por su manera de pensar su ideología comunista. Es más, hay un libro que se destaca, que está aquí en la presentación, que se titula Left of Karl Marx, a la izquierda de Karl Marx, haciendo una referencia a, aunque estos dos personajes eran comunistas, pensares muy diferentes, ¿no? A la izquierda del Karl Marx se traduciría literalmente, y la ironía de todo esto es que Claudia está sepultada a la izquierda de Karl Marx. Entonces queríamos hacer esa apreciación.
Yes. And so much more to say about her in connection to the other women that I've mentioned. But I think she's an important figure to include, and so many others during this time period who we're just learning about. And so thankful to Carol Boyce Davis, who is the author of this book and the other book on her, on Claudia Jones. So
I also wanted to shout out Dr. Carol Boyce Davies. She was my college professor when I was a freshman doing an Africana studies course back in 2004, 2005 at FIU, when she was the director of the African New World Studies program. I went and translate that. Quería darle un saludo a mi profesora, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, que escribió este libro. Yo la tuve como una profesora cuando estaba haciendo estudios Africana en el 2004-2005. Y en ese tiempo ella era la directora del programa de estudios africanos del Nuevo Mundo.
Thank you for that. Yeah, she's phenomenal in the way that she brought Claudia Jones to life for all of us to learn about and to engage in, as we talk about resistance and the way that looks in organizing. So I do want to make mention, of course, of the civil rights movement, two main figures that are often not talked about, because usually, even when I'm teaching and I ask students what they know about the civil rights movement, they often mention mostly males, mostly men, MLK, Malcolm X, and if they know any woman, it's usually Rosa Parks. And so I always make mention of Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, and there are so many others who are both critical figures in the civil rights movement. And so, as we know, Fannie Lou Hamer was the co-founder of the Freedom Democratic Party, which was established to go against the Mississippi Democratic Party. And she was the representative at the Democratic Convention in 1964. She also organized the Mississippi Freedom Summer, along with SNCC and other members of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in an attempt to register as many African Americans in Mississippi as possible. And so lately she's been used to compare Stacey Abrams, because the way that Stacey Abrams organized in Georgia. But there are many who fight back against that, because Fannie Lou Hamer stands alone in her category of the work that she did in terms of resisting white supremacy in Mississippi.
Yo muchas veces les pregunto a mis estudiantes, cuando hablamos de los movimientos de derechos civiles en Estados Unidos, de los personajes que ellos conocen, qué saben sobre ese movimiento. Y lo primero que me comentan es sobre Martin Luther King, y todos siendo líderes hombres. Cuando les pregunto, ¿conocen a algún líder o alguna líder mujer de ese movimiento? Lo primero que pues sale a relucir es Rosa Parks, pero hubieron muchas mujeres detrás del movimiento de derechos civiles en Estados Unidos. Aquí resaltamos a Fannie Lou Hamer y a Ella Baker. Fannie Lou Hamer fue clave en el movimiento, ya que fue la cofundadora de Dr. Monroe. If you could go up, I want to say it correctly, speaking on Fannie Lou Hamer. Y okay. La cofundadora back up, sorry, there you go. Del partido Partido Libertad Democrática, que fue establecido para retar al Partido Demócrata de Mississippi. En 1964 se realizó la convención de demócratas y la que representó al partido fue Fannie Lou Hamer. También organizó lo que se conoce como el Verano de Libertad en Mississippi, que fue para resistir ante la opresión y la supremacía blanca. Fue un movimiento muy sangriento, fue un verano muy sangriento en el cual muchas personas también fallecieron, solo peleando para el derecho a poder inscribir a la comunidad negra para que tuvieran su derecho al voto. Y Fannie Lou Hamer fue la que lideró eso. Y no hablamos de eso cuando se piensa en los derechos, en el movimiento de los derechos civiles en Estados Unidos. No hablamos de eso y lo clave que fue eso, porque fue el derecho al voto que permitió también instar a esos cambios que existieron.
Okay, and Ella Baker, who is a well-known figure. She was a mentor to Stokely Carmichael, to Diane Nash, who's another critical figure in the conversation of women and resistance, but also her work in the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, where Martin Luther King was the first president, but also doing her work in SNCC. She was an analyst where she did a lot of the work to ensure that SNCC had results in the work that they did in the communities. Something even more interesting in terms of her activism is that she was very much involved in the anti-invasion of Italy in Ethiopia, and so you can see that her work is on an international level and not just on a United States, Mississippi activism level. And so Ella Baker is also a very critical figure to the conversation of civil rights, but beyond civil rights. And I would say both of them are for that. And oftentimes they are left out of the conversation of Black women, of Africana women and resistance.
Ella Baker fue mentora de muchos de los líderes, los hombres del derecho de movimientos civiles en Estados Unidos, perteneciente al NAACP y a la conferencia del cristiano sureño de Estados Unidos, Ella Baker, del cual fue presidente Martin Luther King. Ella Baker también era analista para el analista del grupo de estudiantes que lideraron el movimiento, entre ellos al cual pertenecía John Lewis, el movimiento de inscribir a votantes negros, y ayudó para que ese activismo, para dar resultados y en esas estrategias que tenían para poder inscribir a votantes. Entonces su trabajo fue muy clave y se resalta, pese a que no se incluye en las conversaciones, en los conversatorios que hay sobre el movimiento de derechos civiles en Estados Unidos. Pero más allá de su aporte al movimiento de derechos civiles en Estados Unidos, también se destaca su aporte al movimiento de derechos civiles en sí y a nivel internacional. Fue una vocera y anti a la invasión de Italia en Etiopía, alguien que también estuvo involucrada en apoyar esa anti-invasión. You're on mute, Dr. Monroe.
My apologies. So the last woman that I want to shed light on, who I truly feel has extended and has the most expansive reach in terms of resistance, is Assata Shakur. Born in Queens, New York, has roots in South Carolina, but mainly known for being a member of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, and for her escape from prison in the United States and finding political asylum in Cuba under Fidel Castro. And so she was really radicalized as a student at CUNY in New York, where she became a member of the Golden Drum Society. I wanted to share this quote from her at the bottom, which really talks about the strength that she pulls from and draws from with her own activism. I come from a tradition of women maroons, semi-maroons, who didn't just try to escape from oppression, but were totally mind, body, and spirit committed to resisting and winning. I simply want to live on this planet to continue that tradition and make my ancestors proud. And I think that is important because she was able to escape that oppression that many of us still face in our communities. And which is why I say that she is one of the persons who has this furthest extension of resistance, because she was able to escape it and still critique it through her book, her autobiography, Asada, that many of us rely on today in conversations of resistance.
Quiero también destacar por último a Sara Shakur, anteriormente miembro del Partido de las Panteras Negras, miembro del Ejército de Liberación Negra. Pudo escapar de aquí, de la prisión en Estados Unidos, obtuvo asilo político en Cuba y era una activista estudiantil, miembro de la sociedad, no sé cómo se traduce en español, pero The Golden Drum Society, un grupo estudiantil. Y a Sara ha continuado con su resistencia, nos ha enseñado la manera de cómo escapar de esa opresión que muchos de nosotros aún vivimos en nuestras comunidades. Escapó de eso, ya es un ejemplo de esa fortaleza y de esa posibilidad de escapar de eso. Y su libro es un libro que aún influencia los movimientos de resistencia que ella escribió durante su asilo político en Cuba. Y recalcamos una de sus citaciones, algo que, como ella dice, yo vine de una tradición de mujeres cimarrones, semicimarrones, que no solo trataron de escapar la opresión, pero están comprometidas en mente, espíritu, en resistir y ganar. Yo simplemente quiero vivir en este planeta para continuar esa tradición y hacer a mis ancestros orgullosos.
Thank you. Another important aspect, so my dissertation is on Claudia Jones and Assata Shakur. I do a comparison of their lives in terms of their activism, being in New York, the organizations that they organized with, the surveillance of COINTELPRO, but also them being incarcerated and then being dispersed from the United States for in different ways. Of course, Assata escaped, but Claudia Jones was deported. And so it really brings us into the conversation of Black internationalism. But also with all of the women that we talked about today, it was through collective organizing that they did this work. So it wasn't just a group of Africana Black women. It was always in connection and in community with Black men and women to see the greater good for and towards the Black liberation struggle.
Bueno, algo que quiero destacar, yo hice mi tesis de doctorado sobre Assata Shakur y Claudia Jones, destacando su activismo, las dos estando en Nueva York, y cómo las dos escaparon en diferentes, pues fueron puestas privadas de su libertad en Estados Unidos. Assata Shakur pudo escapar, Claudia Jones fue deportada a Londres, como dijimos, pero destacando ese activismo y ante todo la internacionalización de la negritud, del mundo africano, esa conexión que no solo trabajan aisladas y solo con un solo movimiento, pero con lo que significa el real significado de la diáspora, ¿no? También esa solidaridad con otros movimientos a nivel internacional de la diáspora, y destacar que ellas no trabajaron solas, no eran solo unas líderes solas, liderando un movimiento, sino es haber podido organizarse, haber podido organizar un colectivo y tener esa conexión en la comunidad. Ante todo es lo que se destaca a estas dos líderes y de su poder como mujeres negras, mujeres africanas, pues el mundo africano.
So to kind of stay on Assata Shakur, the United States is still has a money, you know, to put out toward her head. They want her to return back to the United States. A bounty is on her head. She's the only woman, Black woman, on the FBI most wanted list. And so one of the things that I found in the archives at Howard University was a letter that she wrote to Amiri Baraka, the revolutionary poet that we know, where she's just thanking him in this letter for the work that he does, for supporting her during her trial, and talking about the first time she met him, and just thanking him for his support and solidarity during her trial. And so this was not dated, but it was in his archives. It was in his items at Howard University. So I thought this was very interesting to include, because it connects the Black arts movement to this resistance of Black people, right? When we think of poetry and arts, and the way that we use that as a way to resist and to talk about resistance.
También quiero destacar algo que encontré durante mi investigación en los archivos de la Universidad de Howard. Encontré una carta de Assata Shakur escrita a Mary Baraka. Estimamos que fue escrita, no tiene fecha, pero se percibe que fue escrita en 1970, donde Assata Shakur le agradece a Mary Baraka su solidaridad, su apoyo durante el juicio que ella tuvo en Estados Unidos. Y esto también destaca la conexión del movimiento del arte negro a través de la poesía y el arte, como también los negros y el mundo africano resistimos, ¿no? No es solo esa resistencia militar, sino a través del arte, de la poesía, que también encontramos ese mundo de resistencia, otra manera. Y lo otro que quisiera destacar, que Assata Shakur aún sigue siendo perseguida por el gobierno de Estados Unidos. Es la única mujer que está en la lista, la única mujer negra, perdón, que está en la lista del FBI de los más most wanted list, John and George. ¿Cómo traduciríamos eso?
Lista de los más buscados.
Más buscados, gracias. Se me escapó la palabra. Entonces, la lista de los más buscados del FBI, y hay aún ahí están solicitando dinero por su captura. Entonces esto sigue siendo algo, y esto muestra su resistencia aún, ella estando con su asilo político y aún escribiendo e influenciando los movimientos aquí y en el mundo.
And one of the last things that she mentions at the end of this letter to him is that, and I'm just going to read it verbatim, I absolutely agree that there can be no revolution without a scientific dialectical analysis and a Marxist-Leninist party. And so she, again, connects herself to this Marxist ideology, the same way that Claudia Jones and many political organizations did during the 1960s. I'm going to go to the next slide. So I see that I've been talking for a while, so I'm just going to wrap up by including, again, really relying on the Black arts movement and the way that has transcended into the hip hop movement that we know today, and the way that hip hop was used as a tool of resistance as well. But also the way that Assata Shakur has been the inspiration of many of the artists that we know today, including Common, where he dedicates a song to her. A Song for Assata is the name of it, where it talks about her story. And then Yasin Bey, formerly known as Most Def, had an article about her. And then on social media, we know many of these movements that people rely on to have in conversation, who are inspired by her. One of the other things I want to, oh, go ahead, I'll mention it afterwards.
Para cerrar, aún en la influencia destacar la influencia de Sarah Shakur y en la actualidad en el hip hop, a través de la música, su influencia también y las artes, como lo hemos destacado, como ha inspirado a otros artistas, incluyendo a Common, el cantante Common, que ha escrito una canción sobre ella que se llama Para Sara, For Sara, y donde él viajó a Cuba en el 2000 y la conoció y aprendió sobre su historia, entonces destaca esto. Igualmente que el artista Mos Def, que la destaca en sus canciones y escribió sobre ella. Entonces, cómo ella sigue influenciando en lo que es la resistencia a través de la música del hip hop.
So Assata Shakur can be placed within the conversation of course, Angela Davis, Elaine Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, but you cannot mention Assata Shakur without also mentioning Safia Bukhari, and also persons who were very much involved in her struggle, like Sundiata Akoli, Dhoruba Ben Wahad, and so many others who, draw from her strength as well, who are still under the surveillance of the United States wherever they are. And so I wanted to also mention that in terms of political prisoners and the way that has major, I guess, contributions to the way that we look at resistance, specifically George Jackson, Soledad Brothers, and the way that conversation is still very relevant today, because we still have political prisoners who are incarcerated.
También para destacar, no podemos hablar de Sarah Shakur sin mencionar a Angela Davis, a Kathleen Cleaver, a Sofia Bukhari, a Sundari Okai, todas que han sido en su momento o son prisioneras, están vigiladas como prisioneras políticas, algunas como prisioneras políticas y aún vigiladas por el gobierno, y la contribución que ellas tienen al movimiento de resistencia, ¿no? Esto es una resistencia como tal, y esto es relevante porque aún tenemos prisioneros políticos, pero tener eso es marcado, y también no solo la inspiración que da Sarah Shakur, sino la inspiración que ella ha derribado de estas otras mujeres.
And so just to kind of close out, of course, resistance, maroonage, and liberation in the 21st century, we see so many movements on social media, but also in those communities within SARS, Free Senegal, US out of Haiti, and women, Black women, Africana women have been at the forefront of these movements in solidarity with Black men as well. And so I definitely want to emphasize that there is not a separation between the work that Black women do, because it's always for the collective and toward the Black liberation of all African people. And so one of the other examples is Ase Traore, a Black woman in France who organizes against police brutality. I think her brother was killed by the police, and you see her face a lot. And so I would want to learn more about other parts of the world who have some of these same women and resistance, who I didn't mention because there are many. And so I definitely want to open the conversation up to have a conversation.
Y para cerrar, quiero pues volver a recalcar sobre la resistencia de los cimarrones. Entre esos movimientos, como vemos hoy en día, Black Lives Matter and SARS, Estados Unidos fuera de Haití, entre otros. Quiero también destacar que esto, o sea, cuando las mujeres en sus movimientos de resistencia es un colectivo, esto es la liberación de todo el pueblo negro, de todos los negros. Entonces no se actúa solo para la liberación de las mujeres negras y la resistencia solo con ese fin. El fin es un trabajo en colectivo para la liberación de todos. Y también quiero destacar, para cerrar, Assa Traoré en Francia, también que ha liderado el movimiento contra la policía, contra la brutalidad policíaca. Su hermano fue abatido por la policía en Francia, es otra mujer, y esto me lleva a decirles que yo quiero aprender de otras, porque hay muchas mujeres de las cuales no hablamos hoy y de las cuales la doctora Monroe ella misma dice que ella no conoce. Entonces ella está aquí en este espacio para también aprender de ustedes y aprender de otras mujeres y sus luchas de resistencia en el mundo, en sus países. Entonces con eso ella cierra y agradece a todos los participantes por asistir hoy.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful, amazing. Thank you, Dr. Monroe, and thank you, Diana, for the wonderful translation.
Wonderful translation. Thank you.
Diana, are you sure you're not a professional translator?
By no means. I feel like I butchered it, but I try to honor your work, Dr. Monroe.
Yeah, I try not to say too much because I know.
That was a great work. You did great. Thank you. Muchas gracias, doctora Monroe. Muchas gracias, Diana, por la traducción. Y estamos haciendo un poco de broma porque Diana hizo un excelente trabajo traduciendo e interpretando la conferencia de Dr. Monroe. Muchas gracias. Dr. Monroe, what I usually do is that I speak in both languages because we have audience in both languages. So we have English-speaking audience, Spanish-speaking audience. Some of the people that is participating, they are bilingual, but we want to honor people that do not speak either English or Spanish. So what I do is, I give my piece or present my piece in English, and then I translate it into Spanish myself.
Okay.
So please just bear with me. Estaba diciendo a la doctora Monroe que tenemos los participantes, hay unos que son angloparlantes, algunos que son hispanoparlantes y hay algunos que son bilingües, pero para honrar tanto los que hablan solo inglés o los que hablan español, lo que hacemos básicamente es presentar la información en inglés y luego se hace la traducción en español. Y yo hago eso, me traduzco a mí mismo cuando presento la información. So here we go. Aquí vamos. Dr. Monroe, I just, we're going to enter the little, conversation piece in the Q&A session. I know that you don't have, you have some time, but probably we don't want to stay here the whole day. But I know that you will address some questions or comments. And so I want to open this section, the Q&A, Q&A discussion section, by making a couple of comments. Decía la doctora Monroe que vamos a empezar la sesión de preguntas y respuestas y de discusión, y que probablemente ella tiene más cosas que hacer el día de hoy, pero tiene un poco de tiempo para hablar con nosotros, para discutir, para responder preguntas, para escuchar comentarios. Entonces yo voy a empezar con un comentario y una pregunta. I have a comment and a question, Dr. Monroe. So first, the question is a very easy question. I know that you mentioned Yanga in Mexico, but I'm an African born in Colombia. So I want to ask you, have you heard about Bencos Viejos?
No, I haven't.
Oh, see? I have to ask you that.
Yes.
So that's going to be the homework for the day, Polly. I'm going to drop it in the chat. Bencos Viejos was an amazing guy. He was taken to Colombia from Guinea-Bissau, I think it was. He's one of the most famous Maroons in the Americas because exchangeably with Yanga, they say that they founded the first free settlement in the whole continent. So in Mexico, they say it was Yanga. In South America, they say that it was Bencos Viejos. Okay. But it was very early. And why I'm talking about Bencos Viejos? Not only because he's important as a Maroon and resistance, because he was fighting along his wife, his woman called Wiwa. She was very, very important in his fight. And we're talking about women resistance. So I have to mention that, Dr. Monroe.
Yes.
La pregunta, tenía un comentario y una pregunta, y la pregunta que le hice a Dr. Monroe era si conocía a Ben Cosbiejo, y lo hice porque soy un africano nacido en Colombia. Entonces ella habló de Yanga, que es uno muy famoso, muy conocido en México. Entonces, Ben Cosbiejo junto con Yanga, los historiadores se intercambian en quién fundó el primer asentamiento libre en todo el continente en las Américas. Entonces le dije eso. Y también porque Ben Cosbiejo luchó al lado con su esposa, que se llama Wiwa. Y como estamos hablando de la resistencia de las mujeres africanas, es muy importante mencionar el papel de Wiwa en la gesta de Ben Cosbiejo. So there you have it, Dr. Monroe. Ben Cosbiejo, don't forget.
Also, I wanted to highlight that we did a session with Dr. Kemet Shockley and Dr. Lanals on Benkos and his community, the community he founded in Colombia, which is called San Basilio de Palenque. También quería resaltar que hicimos una presentación con el Dr. Kemet Shockley y Dr. Lanals, que ellos hicieron un documental en Palenque y sobre Benkos. Y puse el enlace ahí en el chat. I put the link in the chat.
Oh, thank you so much. You're right. I forgot about that. Yes, Dr. Monroe.
I'm familiar with Dr. Shockley, and I think he has another student, Kofi.
Kofi and Niles.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Howard is a small community, so.
Right. So they did a great work on Ben Cosbiejo and Palenque. Matter of fact, his community still exists today. They still exist, his descendants. Palenque is called Palenque. But I also know that Yanga's descendants still exist, called San Lorenzo de, right? You know, in Mexico, it still exists this town, right?
Mm-hmm.
San Lorenzo de los Negros, I think it's called. Now it's called Yanga. They changed it to Yanga now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they changed it.
Oh, bueno.
And I haven't been, but it's on the list, you know. And as we talk about it, I think it's important because these are not narratives that we see in the history books.
Right. Correct.
Especially even on a higher education level. In my African diaspora studies, we talked about Maroonish, but not in depth, right? And so these are things, this is why these conversations are very important, because now I can use this in the classroom as well. So
right.
Thank you.
Right. Just take a look at it. You'll be fascinated. I'm telling you, this Ben Cosbiejo guy, amazing. He wasn't playing. He actually, the king of Spain has to broke a deal with him. The Spanish Empire. So it's like it's huge. Yeah. So anyway, so that was the question. And let me continue. Now the comment. Ahora voy a hacer el comentario. First in English. You know that in history, and you work in history, right? So historians, they have the tendency to talk about the famous or prominent people when they talk about history. That's a tendency. And then, you know, when you go to the books, you hear about this particular figure and this particular figure, but it's mostly because of the military feat or the military achievement they have. Sometimes, you know, scientific or whatever, but a lot of the history is, or historical accounts are plagued by military achievement and the people who, you know, who got those achievements. Just today, you were talking about, you know, a lot of these activists, a lot of these women, right? Which we love. But the comment I'm trying to make here is that history usually overlooks the work of everyday people, just common people. Now, why I'm saying this because we're talking about Africana women resistance. And guess what? This is what happened. Europeans, in their attempt to colonize and westernize Africa, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but I'm gonna say this, most of the resistance they got was from women. Actually, for them, and it's documented in historical documents that the English had, actually, they have to design a way to break down the social fabric that women established in the African societies for them to be able to colonize the continent or westernize the continent. Let me give you a little example. When the Europeans arrived to Africa, they went there with their worldview and the role and the gender role, or the role they have for European women, which most actually was home, cooking or raising the kids. When they arrived to the continent, they did not know the central role African women play not only at home, but in labor market and all aspects of the societies. So they were thinking, no, we control the guys, we control the men, and we dominate them. Wrong, completely wrong, Dr. Monroe. They soon realized they have to curtail women's role in society to be able to control and possess the land. It was very hard for them because these women, everyday women, not heroines, just regular women, they thought it was a practice. No, it was their lifestyle. Women were holding up the whole fabric of the society. And it's documented. For instance, in Kenya, the English have to do that with the Kikuyus and the Mau Mau. They have to, and you know what it did? They designed ways to westernize women. They send them to school. They did a whole bunch of things. But it was so hard for them to do that because it was embedded in themselves. It was part of the DNA. It was part of the fabric, social fabric. And I just wanted to, that was the comment I wanted to throw out there. Because of course we got Ayas and all these heroines, but just women by being women and the way the African women worldview, it is very different than the worldview of the Europeans. And that was the comment I wanted to make. Dr.
I do have a small rebuttal just to add on. But go ahead. I know you have to do your translation.
Yes. Okay, and then you're gonna go ahead. So, lo que le estoy diciendo a la doctora Monroe, que los historiadores tienen una manera particular o una tendencia particular de hablar usualmente de la gente prominente o de la gente famosa o de la gente que tiene logros académicos o logros científicos o logros, o sobre todo logros militares. Y esa es una tendencia que tienen los historiadores. Y usualmente dejan de lado a la gente común y corriente, o a los contextos históricos de la gente del común. Y en este caso yo quería hablar de eso porque cuando los europeos llegaron al continente, a África, ellos llegaron con una visión de las mujeres muy occidentalizada, muy europeo, y que básicamente era el rol de las mujeres era en la casa, o bien cocinando, o bordando, o cuidando, o criando niños. Pero cuando llegaron a África, muy pronto se dieron cuenta que el rol de la mujer en las sociedades africanas era central en todos los aspectos. Desde la parte del trabajo, desde la agricultura, desde la parte de mercadeo, en los plazas de mercado, y también en la casa, obviamente. Entonces, usualmente los colonizadores iban pensando en dominar a los hombres, y no, de hecho, la gente que puso mucho más resistencia en la colonización del continente fueron las mujeres. Y no fue realmente una resistencia militar, que la hubo, pero fue una resistencia que se puede llamar una resistencia pasiva, aunque no creo que es pasiva, es simplemente una resistencia del estilo de vida y de la cosmovisión de las sociedades africanas en el rol de las mujeres, que fue muy central en todo. Entonces, para los colonizadores los europeos, dominar la tierra, dominar las sociedades, tuvieron que diseñar cómo cambiar la percepción de rol que tenían las sociedades africanas en torno a sus mujeres, porque lo hicieron muy difícil, porque era parte de su estilo de vida, parte de la fábrica social de las sociedades. Por aquí está mi brother. Máximo, he's in South Africa, Dr. Monroe. So he's saying, in Lesotho, where I was born, women play a key role in society before the advent of democracy. Lesotho had a woman region. Oh, wow. It was not practice of the day, given patriarchy and the political autonomy of the state. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brother Maximus, for sharing that with us. Yes, I know about the, I know the patriarchy, the way we know it here in the West, that's Western patriarchy.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
El patriarcado, como lo conocemos, es un patriarcado occidental. So, Dr. Monroe, I'm gonna stop right there. I just made a comment. Please enlighten.
That was a great comment, because when Europeans arrived, as you mentioned, there was this disruption in the everyday lives of African people, specifically the roles that women played in their societies. And even so much so that they created these new classes of Black women, right? By, having children with them, educating those mulatto children, and then, that lingered on into the way that they controlled enslavement. And so I mentioned that because the seigneurs, who are Black women from Senegal, were an elite class of African women, right? And they, in many ways, that can be looked at as a way to resist being oppressed because you are of this elite class, right? But that doesn't take away from the exploitation that they had with other communities in Senegal. And so I mentioned that because I think it's important to note that not all African women were a part of these physical ways of resistance, but they were very much a part of the same way we see today. There are those who are wanting to fight, and there are those who are just comfortable with being in other spaces of the elite, right? Of classism.
You got that, Diana?
Sorry, Diana.
Okay, John, I thought you were going to translate the Q&A, but my apologies.
I'm sorry.
Would you like to translate this part? Sorry, I was listening and I didn't write down.
Okay, I'm going to ask George so you can give me a hand. George, you got that?
If Dr. Monroe wants to go over some of that again, I can write down some notes because I also wasn't writing notes down.
Well, I just mentioned the way that Europeans came in to disrupt the roles of women throughout those West African and other societies in Africa, and how they also created classes of African people like the mulattoes, but specifically the seigneurs of Senegal, who was an elite class of African women who had access to the things that, you know, the French had access to in Senegal.
So, but a seigneur, they were not mixed race, right? They were African, straight African women?
They were African, and then eventually there became mixed, you know, because it was not just one generation. They became generational over time, so.
But like their elite class, was that due to them being mixed with Europeans, or they were elite just as African women, indigenous African women?
So it was a mixture of that, right? I think it started off as them being just
they created this elite, I think you just.
Yeah, they created this elite class through, you know, sexual intercourse and other ways. So yeah.
Okay, entonces la doctora Monroe estaba hablando que cuando los europeos vinieron, ellos interrumpieron la sociedad y allá ellos crearon una clase élite de mujeres negras que se llama los seigneurs en Senegal. Eso era específicamente en Senegal. Y yo le pregunté que si eso tenía que ver con mestizaje. Él dijo que eventualmente sí hubo mestizaje entre los europeos y estas mujeres negras, pero en el principio no necesariamente. Eran los europeos que crearon esta clase élite de mujeres negras. Se llamaban las seigneurs de Senegal. Y Diana, si perdí algo, si no tengo algo, por favor, agregue.
Sí, lo otro para recalcar también era pues el cambio de estructura, volviendo a la charla, el cambio de estructuras que causaron los europeos, o sea, aparte de este particular caso en Senegal, también las jerarquías se crearon, ¿no? Y las diferencias entre la comunidad negra, que se creó, los mulatos y demás, o sea, se crearon esas distinciones y esas jerarquías y separando dentro de la propia comunidad negra, separando a la gente, creando esa división dentro de las comunidades.
Thank you. So basically, like tomorrow, the women over there, because, you know, they just gave these guys a headache every step of the way. See, and that's a way of resistance of oppression, not necessarily through warfare, but just by being. Absolutely. That's what I wanted to kind of highlight here, you know, the whole role and worldview of African studies when it comes to gender, when it comes to women, when it comes to women's role. Right,
very calculated, always 10 steps ahead. And so I think that's important to note as well. And so I mentioned the women that I did because it helps us to regionally navigate the way resistance looks in other spaces, but all in an effort to resist, you know, colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, which we see later on, as you mentioned, Western patriarchy. And so that's the difficulty that many scholars have when they start introducing African feminism within the conversation, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning of the presentation.
That was a great point. It was a great point. Thank you, Dr. Monroe. Yeah, Dr. Monroe dice que claro, muchas formas de resistencia de las mujeres viene varias fases, ¿no? Viene contra la colonización, viene contra la supremacía blanca y viene incluso también contra el patriarcado. Y que hay que hacer una distinción sobre el feminismo africano, que ella lo mencionó al principio de su charla. Brother Shabazz is making a comment.
Yeah,
Brother Maximo from South Africa. Brother Maximo works in the University of Johannesburg, by the way, Dr. Monroe. That's a great way to connect. This is a way to connect and maybe, you know.
Absolutely.
Right. So he has a question. And also there is a comment from Gloria from Colombia. Gloria is saying that in Colombia, in the Pacific Coast, which is where the Black people live there. Most of, you know, it's one of the Pacific Coast is like the Colombian African heart, or the African heart of Colombia is the Pacific Coast. They say that in the even like now currently in the context, there's matriarchy. It is huge in the Pacific Coast. Yeah, so you might want to take a look into that as well.
Yes, I will. You know.
And Gloria, she's an educator down there. Brother Shabazz says something. He said, I don't know if you want to read it, Dr. Monroe. Well, I can have that for that because you've been. Well, okay, go ahead, Dr. Monroe. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to read. I had to enlarge it. There's actually a major critique of the big man approach to historical analysis among mainstream historians. Not sure, but I think it goes back to the 70s or 80s. The response was for historians to analyze history from below. So, Brother Shabazz, that bottom-up history, like CLR James gives us when he discusses the Haitian Revolution from the bottom, right? Talking about the people who are in the struggle, who fought off that oppression.
And I just translated Brother Shabazz' comment.
Okay.
Acabé de traducir el comentario de Brother Shabazz, que me parece muy pertinente, que cómo la historia se critica desde el enfoque del gran hombre. Thank you, Brother Shabazz, for that comment. So there is a question from my brother Maximus. Go ahead, Maximus, but you're going to have to say the question. Oh, okay, go ahead, George.
We got to translate Dr. Monroe's response.
Okay, go ahead.
Brother Shabazz. So, lo que decía la doctora Monroe es que hay que mirar así estudios desde abajo para arriba, y ella se refirió a C.L.R. James, y él escribió sobre la revolución haitiana. And C.L.R. James was from Trinidad, él era de Trinidad. Entonces, él es uno de los más antiguos panafricanistas. He's one of the oldest Pan-Africanists. And John Henry Clark recognizes, you know, Trinidad had the greatest Pan-Africanists, and C.R. James is one, I believe he mentioned. Estaba diciendo que John Henry Clark reconoció que Trinidad ha tenido los más importantes panafricanistas, y creo que C.R. James es uno de ellos que él mencionó.
That's the Black Jacobins, right?
Yes.
Los Jacobinos Negros. Es un libro recomendado para todos, escrito por C.R.L. James. Por favor, si pueden leerlo. Y sobre todo Haití, que está ahorita en las noticias del mundo. And you know, it takes someone another life because Haiti is right now like in the spotlight because of what happened. And saying that about Haiti, let me say this real quick. Remember the Haitian Revolution, because you talked about some of them at the beginning. There are 5 women, actually not 5, there's tons of women that are usually not mentioned with the same importance as some of the guys in the Haitian Revolution. And I'm just going to give you a couple of names just for, you know, just to refresh our memory. Sanité Belair. Sanité Belair was a military. She rise to the ranks of even, I think it was sergeant or lieutenant or something like that. She was fighting with her husband, and she was executed by Napoleon because of the bravery. Cecile Fatiman. a voodoo priestess that they attributed that was the beginning of the Haitian Revolution because she kind of prophesied that on a ceremony. Marie-Jean Lamartine, Marie Sainte-Basile, and Catherine Flon. Those are like some of the names that I kind of came through. I was looking at my notes. But the most important thing to say is the role of women in the Haitian evolution. And I'm saying this because Haiti is in the spotlight right now. So we got to look at Haiti from the whole perspective, not what happened just now. Estaba diciendo a Dr. Monroe porque alguien habló aquí sobre Haití, creo que, bueno, yo le estaba diciendo sobre C.L. James, sobre su libro Los Jacobinos Negros, que habla de la Revolución Haitiana, y la mención que hizo del doctor John Henry Clark. Y estaba diciendo es que hay unas mujeres en la Revolución Haitiana que usualmente no se nombran y que son muy, muy, muy importantes. Y que no solo, y que fueron, y que estuvieron dentro de, en el corazón de la revolución como sus gestas militares también. Entonces, por ejemplo, está Suzanne Belair o Sanité Belair. Puedo escribir los nombres en el chat en un momento. Ella fue una militar que estuvo luchando con su esposo. Su esposo creo que era un general y ella alcanzó a llegar a los rangos de teniente o de coronel por su bravura o su braveza en el campo de batalla. Ella y su esposo fueron ejecutados por el ejército de Napoleón, por ejemplo. Está Cecile Fátima, que es muy conocida. Ella sí es más conocida. Ella es una sacerdotisa vudú que se le atribuye que fue la que instó o que profetizó la revolución haitiana. Y que a partir de una de sus ceremonias fue donde empezó básicamente la revolución haitiana, porque ella instó a la gente y lo profetizó, ¿no? También ella se la conoce un poco más que Sanité Belair, por ejemplo. Pero también está Marie-Jean Lamartinière, está Marie Sainte-Basile, está Catherine Flon, que puedo poner los nombres ahí si la gente está más interesada en conocer eso. Thank you. So, Brother Chavas, 1 second, I give you the chance to open the mic for you, but Maximus, he had a question. Go ahead, Maximus.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everybody. My sister, sorry that I came in late when you had said such good things that I'm hearing pass by. My question is just for clarification. Feminism is not my field, but I write passionately about women who have been heroes in our time in my own space, in my own context here. You referred, I think, towards the last slide, to the fact that feminism and capitalism were the results not of what those who went before the current maybe generation of women, I'm just reiterating but not say verbatim, we're not fighting for. And I just want to have clarification of that as an understanding, but also what would be the implications, therefore, of the result of this fight?
Dr. Monroe, before you answer the question, Maximus, I'm going to have to ask you to ask the question in Spanish too, please. I love it when you do that. You know that. You know what I'm doing here.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to try my broken Spanish. I don't practice it yet.
Maximus, don't be humble. You speak great Spanish. Come on.
Pues saludos a todo el mundo. Aquí podemos decir buenas noches. Mi pregunta tiene que ver con lo que dijo el doctor Monroe sobre el resultado, pues, del feminismo y el capitalismo que vino, pero no era como la idea, pues, o objetivo de las mujeres que lucharon anteriormente. Y nada más quería yo entender de qué se trata eso y también cuál sería los resultados de eso, pues, en nuestro contexto de hoy. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for being here. So I was talking about the way that feminism the way that feminism was introduced to African societies after colonialism, because of the way that the roles of women has shifted in society. And Dr. Oyewumi.
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, I think we got it.
I muted it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Dr. Oyewumi, she talks about how feminism in Africa can be looked at as the white woman's burden, in the sense that it has the same implications as imperialism does in many societies. And so oftentimes scholars, when they're referencing African women and the role of African women in resistance, they do it from a feminist foundation, a feminist ideology. And so there are scholars who push back against that. Like in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned Valethia Watkins, but there's also Clenore Hudson Weems, who has Africana womanism, that it has a more inclusive approach to discussing African women throughout the world, but also inclusive to Black men, Black children. And so that's kind of the framework that I draw from when I'm discussing African women, Africana women throughout the world. You know, with not much critique, just a different way of thinking about how we frame Africana women in our struggles. Did I answer your question? Perfect.
George.
Dr. Monroe, what was the other lady you said? Valethia Watkins, and who else? If you could put it in the chat for me.
Oh, sure. Clenore Hudson Weems. She has Africana womanism. And
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, because I'm going to mention something else that I think is vital.
Okay. I don't have everything you got, but Dana's going to help me out. So I'll start off with, okay, voy a empezar. Entonces, la doctora Monroe dice que el feminismo en África puede ser visto como la carga de la mujer blanca, que tiene el mismo impacto que el colonialismo en África, y base y ideología feminista. Hay académicos que han rechazado eso, como Valethia Watkins, y también Clenore Hudson Weems, que habla sobre Africana womanism, puedo traducirlo como mujerismo africano. Y que ella viene de este punto de vista cuando ella presenta. Y Africana womanism incluye a los hombres y niños y niñas negros. Entonces, así como para darle contexto, el feminismo excluye al hombre, pero Africana womanism, porque viene de un punto de vista africano centrado, entonces donde se practica la ¿cómo se dice? Complementariedad. Entonces, siempre en la cultura africana original y indígena hubo el balance entre hombre y mujer. So Dr. Monroe was adding some information, and I explained that indigenous African culture, there's been complementarity between men and women. And that's the point, the perspective that Africana womanism is based off of, because it's an African-centered perspective. So it brings balance.
Yes, absolutely. Balance.
Thank you. I think we have a brother Shabazz has the hand up.
Okay.
And also, I know Dr. Monroe has to leave soon. So Dr. Monroe, please let us know what's the last question you can take. Because I don't want to, hold up your schedule. I know you said you had 2 hours max, and we're at that mark now.
Okay, and we'll do it until what time is it? It's 12. That we can do until 1.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh my God, that's great, Dr. Monroe. That's great feeling. We take it. We'll take it.
Oh wait, is that too short? That too long?
No. I'm saying it's nice.
Okay.
He's very grateful.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
very grateful. That's what
I'm
I'm saying.
good. I'm good.
Brother Shabazz, go ahead.
Peace, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Glad to see you here, Brother Shabazz.
Okay, let me, Sister Monroe, Sister Dr. Monroe, thank you for that incredible presentation and bringing and calling off the names and bringing to our attention these great female ancestors and contemporary freedom fighters. Thank you for that. I was wondering, you know, we mentioned Haiti a few times and you talked about some of the freedom fighters in Ghana. What I've noted in contemporary times is that when you see, for example, street demonstrations in Haiti or in Ghana, or even in the political systems, you know, in the Ghanaian parliament, or even in the Haitian government, there are very few women. I'm wondering if you've had any conversations with women on the ground in Ghana or elsewhere, and what are their thoughts about the current status of women in politics and protests in those spaces? And if you haven't, or alongside of that, what are your own perspectives on the current status of women in these spaces? Thank you.
I know he has to translate, so.
Again, did you get some notes on that one?
A little bit. Bueno, el Brother Shabazz pregunta, pues hablando en el contexto de la revolución haitiana, lo que está ocurriendo en este momento y los apuntes que hizo la doctora Monroe sobre las revoluciones en Ghana y el rol de las mujeres, el rol de liderazgo de las mujeres en esas revoluciones. Entonces pregunta que en la actualidad, ¿cuál es su conexión con algunas de esas mujeres en Ghana? ¿Cuál ha sido, qué movimientos de resistencia existen en la actualidad? Did I capture all of that, George?
Yeah, that's the main question. Yep, that was good. Thank you.
Sounded good to me.
Sorry, I was trying to write down some of the names mentioned. Brother Shabazz, great question. You know, thankfully, when I was in Ghana, I was able to communicate and be amongst the people from all walks of life. And one of the persons that I was able to meet was a young revolutionary brother by the name of Ernesto Yeboah. And he was very instrumental in organizing a vigil for George Floyd, which later the Ghanaian government wanted to incarcerate him because of that. He's also a part of the organization, and forgive me because I'm going to look it up, in Ghana called the Economic Fighters League. And so we and him had a very fruitful conversation about the work that they do in Ghana to organize against the government, against capitalism and neocolonialism. And one of the questions that I asked him was, why weren't there more women involved in this struggle, right? And his partner is, right? I don't know her name, but his partner is involved in it. But through those conversations, even other Pan-African organizations, I know you're familiar with Mjiba, who is an African-American woman who works at the University of Ghana, who is a part of the All-African Revolutionary Party. And so it does seem like men dominate the political activism in Ghana specifically. I'm not sure about Haiti. I was there in 2017, but not for organizing purposes. But in this conversation, it seemed as though the women were not as prominent in these organizing efforts as the men were. And I truly don't know the reason for that, because Ghanaian women are very vocal about issues, maybe not on the forefront and maybe not visibly, but they have very strong opinions the same way we do throughout the African diaspora. And so I think that deserves more investigation and more questioning, because it is interesting that the main figures that we see are, you know, male dominated, but I don't think that that is to say that women are not a part of, you know, these efforts. Because as I mentioned, Ernesto said that his wife is like-minded and is also in the struggle as well. So yeah, I just wanted to share that little bit. But as far as I know, I hadn't met any women who were, who are a part of these organizations. And I asked, you know, where are the sisters, you know? So yeah, that's a great question. And I know you were there too, so you might have some insight on the women's involvement as well. And
yeah, I don't, you know, I think you would move better in those spaces than I would. But it's a question, and I did meet with Ernesto for our lunch, and oh, there's a sister there, Zimbabwean sister, or not Zimbabwean, Ugandan, Namata, do you know her?
mm-mm.
Yeah, so she's living in Ghana. She's an architect. She's also a fierce Pan-Africanist.
Wow.
And there's also another Nigerian Pan-Africanist in Ghana. What is her name? Oh, you must know her.
Brother Shabazz, if you can you drop the names in the chat?
I will do that. In fact, I'll come up with her name, both names, and drop them in the chat. Thank you very much, sister. I really thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for being here and contributing.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Bueno, para traducir la respuesta de la doctora Monroe, cuando ella estuvo en Ghana pudo comunicarse con varias personas de los diferentes grupos y ámbitos académicos, entre esos Ernesto Ubola, quien realizó una vigilia para George Floyd, que en paz descanse, y fue el gobierno de Ghana, incluso trató de encarcelarlo por realizar esto. Él es parte de la liga del frente de luchadores contra el Economic Fighters League, una liga que lucha contra el neocolonialismo y el capitalismo en Ghana. Y la pregunta iba, entonces ella le hizo la pregunta a este líder visible en Ghana, ¿por qué no habían más mujeres en este movimiento, en el movimiento de la Liga de Luchadores Económicos? Y él le contestó, le dijo, pues mi esposa es parte del movimiento, está mi pareja, es parte de este movimiento y hay otras mujeres. Pero sí se hizo la pregunta y sí fue notable para la doctora Monroe que en estas otras organizaciones panafricanistas no había un liderazgo marcado de las mujeres. Eso no quiere decir que las mujeres no ocupen esos espacios, que no sean vocales, porque ya recalca, las mujeres de Ghana son muy voceras, tienen unas opiniones muy fuertes y mujeres muy empoderadas, pero en este momento pues ella no tiene la respuesta porque no son más prominentes en estas organizaciones. Y lo otro fue una pregunta sobre Haití, también si ella conocía otras organizaciones en Haití con mujeres liderando esos espacios, a lo cual ella fue en Haití en el 2017 en otro contexto no académico, pero no presenció eso. Adicionalmente, hablamos de Nijiba, es una profesora que trabaja en la Universidad de Ghana y con mujeres afroafricanas y de la diáspora africana, y están en el Partido del Pueblo Revolucionario Africano. Es otra mujer que se puede destacar. Entonces, espero que es una pregunta muy válida que hay que hacer y preguntar por qué no vemos esa prominencia de las mujeres en estos movimientos actuales panafricanistas.
All right, thank you. Let's see what we have in the chat. I need to do some housekeeping, how the chat is looking. But we have people connected from different parts. I'd like to hear someone from maybe South America, I don't know, even Central America. Creo que hay gente conectada desde Sudamérica, Centroamérica. Me gustaría escuchar
especially want to hear from the sister. Me gustaría escuchar de las hermanas.
Sí,
Las que están presentes, por favor. Pueden hacerle una pregunta.
Okay, yeah. So we have someone from Panama, that is Yvonne. So Yvonne, if you have a question, you can go ahead and pose the question. You can open the mic. We can, if you don't speak English, we will provide translation. Puedes abrir el micrófono, Yvonne, si así lo desea, si tiene una pregunta, y si no habla inglés, podemos proveer la traducción. Y si habla inglés, le agradecería que lo hiciera en inglés y en español, por favor.
Hoy veo que Gloria tiene la mano subida también.
Ok, esperemos a ver, porque creo que Yvonne había hecho una pregunta antes. Entonces, Yvonne, si puedes, y luego damos el paso a Gloria. Ok. Gloria, adelante.
Muchas gracias. Agradecer por la invitación a esta charla muy importante. Agradecerle a la doctora Moore porque realmente es un espacio donde aprende mucho uno y conoce, porque pues lastimosamente estas invisibilizaciones es que nos tienen como un poquito maniatada frente a nuestra historia y sobre todo ese aporte tan relevante de la mujer.
¿Necesita traducción, Gloria?
¿Ah?
¿Necesita que se le provea traducción a inglés?
No, yo a la doctora y a ustedes, porque pues yo no. ¿Qué les quiero decir? Esta diáspora, como lo muestra la doctora, está reflejada muy en nuestro Pacífico. Hay un patriarcado bastante fuerte, donde la mujer es decisiva en cuanto a la familia, en cuanto a lo político. En Colombia se ve reflejado y sobre todo en la mujer afro se ve mucho ese matriarcado donde, ¿cómo se dice? No esperamos a que nuestros caballeros tomen decisión, sino que nosotras también tomamos decisión. Nosotras también ponemos ese punto de, ¿cómo se dice? Sobre todo en el progreso, La mujer afro en Colombia es muy... mujer afro en Colombia, a él le gusta mucho el estudio y él siempre está queriendo que sus hijos salgan adelante y ellas de alguna u otra forma ponen ese grano de arena, y yo lo digo desde la ancestralidad, cómo esa mujer minera chocuana mandaba a su hijo a estudiar acá a la ciudad, a la orbe, y hay veces uno olvida de pronto ese hecho como tal, ¿no? De que hay muchos profesionales en Colombia que son producto de la minería ancestral, que son producto de ese pancoger de esa mujer afro que ha luchado con su familia desde el campo, y de verdad que eso merece un reconocimiento. Entonces, en ese orden de ideas, yo felicito mucho a la doctora Moore porque nos vive recordando o nos da a entender que ese es un paso importante y que no debemos permitir que ese aporte se invisibilice. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Gloria. Muchas gracias, Gloria. Did you get that, Dr. Monroe, or need a translation?
Oh, I definitely need that translation.
I got some
Please.
notes on what she said. So she's speaking about in Colombia on the Pacific coast. She says the matriarch is very well seen, is very well represented in the Pacific coast, which is the predominantly Black region in Colombia. She said it's reflected in family and politics. She says Black women don't wait for men, and Black women take lead, they take charge, especially when it comes to children. Like she made an example of Black women that have sent their children to school. And she congratulates you because you remind us of this important process of Black women leadership. And it doesn't permit the invisibilization of Black women. You know, these presentations, we're recognizing and reminding all of us about the legacy of Black women, you know, the fights and the resistance that Black women have put out.
And
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I think she also, George mentioned the fact that she's a woman from the Pacific Coast, and then she witnesses the matriarchy in the Pacific Coast of the women being a central role in holding the family and moving towards progress and development.
Okay. Yeah, that was beautiful remarks. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Gloria. Muy bonito los comentarios. Do we have any other sisters that want to speak up and say something?
See, okay. I could continue, you know, just
I got a comment. I mean, I have some comments as well. So I'll go ahead and fill in some gaps. All right, so I want to talk about Black women that have inspired me as well. So Dr. Monroe covered Queen Nanny. She's one of my sheroes because I follow the Maroons throughout the diaspora. So she's one that has inspired me, and she's on the $500 bill in Jamaica. My wife is from there, so I go there all the time, and I love seeing that Queen Nanny is represented on the money of the country. So I'll go ahead and translate that to Spanish. Entonces está diciendo, como nadie más está hablando, quería llenar el hueco. Entonces estaba diciendo que ella habló sobre una de las heroínas mías que me ha inspirado mucho, que se llama la Reina Nani de Jamaica. Y para mí es muy importante la Reina Nani porque era una cimarrona y ella lideró y estableció comunidades en Jamaica. Y como mi esposa es de Jamaica, yo voy a Jamaica todo el tiempo. Y lo más bonito es que ella está representada en el dinero de Jamaica, ella está en el billete de 500, la Reina Nani. And also other sisters that inspired me that weren't mentioned, so I want to highlight them. Queen Nzinga of Angola. And I put in the chat a link to a film on her. It's in Portuguese, but it has captions and you can see it on Quelly. Y quería mencionar otra, la Reina Nzinga de Angola, que también me ha inspirado mucho. Y puse el enlace de la película de la Reina Nzinga en portugués. Está por Quelly. Okay, what's that, Dr. Monroe? I didn't see what you put up. The book?
Oh, I mentioned her really briefly, but this is the book
okay.
on her by Dr. Linda Haywood, you know, that I just
okay.
show. Yeah.
My bad. I didn't know. Yeah, so and then there's another queen, Dr. Monroe, have you heard of Queen Nyabinghi? Entonces le pregunté a la doctora Monroe si ella había escuchado de la Reina Nyabinghi. Entonces, are you familiar with the Nyabinghi sect of Rastafari?
No.
Okay. Entonces le pregunté si conoce el secto Nyabinghi de Rastafari. Entonces, Nyabinghi is a Rastafari sect in Jamaica, and they get that name from Queen Nyabinghi of Uganda. And one of the things that the Nyabinghi is famous for saying in Jamaica is death to white and Black oppressors. And that's a Nyabinghi motto. And está diciendo que la secta Nyabinghi de Rastafari en Jamaica es conocida. Ellos cogieron ese nombre de la Reina Nyabinghi de Uganda. Y una frase que es muy conocida de los Nyabinghi, esa comunidad Rastafari, que ellos dicen es siempre muerte a los opresores blancos y negros. All right, those were my comments.
Those were great. And thank you for putting me on Queen Nyabinghi. I need to look that up. But yeah, Nzinga, no Queen Nanny, I mean, the list goes on. We draw strength from them.
We have Yvonne wants to participate. Yeah, Yvonne, I was calling you earlier. I don't know where you were. Yeah, go ahead, by all means.
Hello, thank you. Dr. Monroe, again, congratulations for your participation. I'm so encouraged with all of what you have taught us. Okay, I would like for you to tell us, how can we empower our young people, especially young students, about the future of us Black women, empowering them with confidence about themselves? Can you give us some words? How can we do that with our young, because some young girls, they don't like to know that they're Black or their Black history. How can we do that in our young people in this generation?
Thank you, Yvonne. That was a great question. You know, for me, someone who has to actively engage with the young people on a college level, but also in my own family, with friends, I always try to meet young women where they are. I think that's the best way to connect with them, to engage with them about things that may be not necessarily lacking, but to share things with them about our history, about where we come from, the strong women that we come from, and how we intend or how we should carry that on, so that we can have, so that we can be liberated, but also so we can see the future that we want to see. And so it's always about, it's not necessarily about meeting, you know, making sure that they're like-minded, but ensuring that we empower them where they are, to ensure that they know the capabilities that they have. Because we all come from a place of unknowing at some point, of ignorance of any of those things. And I don't think that's the case for them. I think that they are very knowledgeable of things right now, but there are things that are impressionable that may take them on a different route. But, you know, I'm confident that eventually we'll all get to a point of liberation and empowerment, where we, you know, continue that tradition every day. So that's what I would offer, that, you know, is to meet them where they are and try to connect with them in the best way possible. You know, social media is pretty popular for them, impressionable. And so how to engage with that to have conversations about certain things. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yes, you did, definitely. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Yvonne, I was asking you to translate that question into Spanish for the Spanish audience. So if you can please do that, and then we'll go ahead and we'll translate that to Monroe.
Sí, claro que sí. Yo lo que quería preguntar es, ¿cómo podemos nosotras, las mujeres negras, empoderar a las jóvenes para que ellas puedan tener creencia en sus raíces? Porque eso es lo que hace falta. Yo estoy hablando de aquí de Panamá, en la provincia de Colón. Muchas jóvenes negras tienen como ese deseo de saber más acerca de sus ancestros. Entonces, con nosotros, ¿cómo podemos hacer para empoderar, que ellas se sientan empoderadas en cuanto a toda la historia que la doctora Monroe nos está hoy en día compartiendo?
Thank you, Yvonne. And then, one second. And then if I think I got some of the answer from, creo que tuvo algo de la respuesta de la doctora Monroe, que dice que trata de encontrar a las niñas o a las chicas donde ellas están y empezar a construir desde allí. Entonces, bueno, eso fue como el resumen, no sé si me ha quedado.
Tengo unas notas también, John. Entonces, ella dijo que trata de conectarse con las jóvenes de cualquier manera posible, porque a esa edad son impresionables, y hoy en día por las redes sociales es una manera de conectarse con ellas.
Gracias, George. All right. Okay, let's see. I'm looking to the chat, see if I can do some housekeeping here. Wow. Okay. So I wanted to make a comment back to Monroe.
Please.
So we almost reaching the point where you have to go. So we really appreciate all your flexibility and patience. But for me, George was talking about the diabetes, they were talking about, all this. There was a group of women that actually really fascinate me. And I came to learn about them, and I don't cease to being fascinated by them. And I'm talking about the Kandake Queens. The Kandake Queens. And Nubia, she's here actually. She's in the audience.
Yeah, she mentioned it.
Right. She made a great presentation last week about Kush, the origin of Kush.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, she's an archaeologist, and she also has a presentation that is called "When Women Were God."
Mm.
Yes, I'm so looking forward to be present in that conference, because she has a conference that's called "When Women Were God." And then she's talking about the ancient Kush and ancient Egypt, when women were actually revered as goddesses. Now, the Kandake Queens, they really fascinate me, because it's a whole matrilineal. It's a line of queens. It's actually, Kush was a queendom for many centuries. And it was not like, the patrilineal, when the king, then the first son of the king. No, it was actually a matrilineal a line of rulers or regents in ancient Kush. So I just wanted to share that with you, that I'm really impressed by the Kandake Queens.
Okay. Most people mention the homie Amazon women,
right,
as something,
right.
But I've left out a few people in general, and usually I mention women in the Pacific, the South Pacific, Australia, and other spaces, because my advisor,
yes.
Dr. Keto Swan, he does work on Black Power in the South Pacific. And so Kath Walker is one of those people, Bobby Sykes, who were very instrumental in fighting off the Europeans in Australia for land rights. And so kind of wanted to mention, since we're doing various geographical spaces throughout the diaspora, that the South Pacific is very dominant in terms of their Black history and Black power.
Yeah, that's something I would love to learn more about too.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's some good history. His book just came out, so it'll be interesting to see.
Lo que yo dije a la doctora Monroe es que unas mujeres que me fascinan, me impresionan muchísimo, son las reinas Kandake del antiguo Kush. Tenemos un par de minutos, Dr. Monroe. We got a couple of minutes. I'm keeping it time. I know. So
we okay. I know somebody else had a few comments, so we'll wrap it up.
We'll wrap it up. Okay. Just let me make this translation real quick, and then we go there. Entonces, las reinas Kandake, decía, la importancia que me gusta muchísimo es porque no fue una reina, sino que fue toda una línea matrilineal de reinas o de regentes del antiguo Kush por varios siglos. Y fue cuando Kush estuvo en su cúspide, ¿no? En todo su esplendor, y hablaba de cómo Nubia, que creo que está por aquí presente, las mencionó en su presentación del domingo pasado. Las reinas Kandake de Kush, no, yo creo que todo el mundo ha escuchado del Imperio Romano, o de César Augusto, o de Alejandro Magno. Bueno, ellos llegaron a Kush o llegaron a Egipto y no quisieron enfrentarse a las reinas Kandake porque eran unas reinas guerreras, de hecho, ¿no? Entonces, me parece impresionante eso, porque el Imperio Romano y Alejandro Magno se los considera de los grandes, uno de los puntos de la historia importantes, y las Kandake no pudieron con las Kandake, pues, no quisieron lidiar con ellas por su poderío militar y su organización.
Sí, Johnny, ella respondió que también hay trabajos que se han hecho, mencionó Kath Walker y Bobby Sykes, que ellos cubren el Pacífico Sur, las islas del Pacífico Sur, y que ellos tienen una historia negra muy fuerte allá en la zona del Pacífico Sur del mundo.
Eso es Australia, New Zealand. What are those countries? Australia,
Tahiti, it's Tahiti, all of them.
Yeah.
Melanesia and all those.
Yes, Melanesia. Yes.
I was in Hawaii, actually. I was talking to a guy in Hawaii, and he was telling me about the Melanesian people thing, and they actually call themselves Black people.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I had a conversation about it with Bala Shabazz the other day, because they call themselves Blacks. I mean,
yeah, Melanesia.
Right. Right. Anyway, go ahead, Dr. Monroe. You want to go ahead and go into those comments that you just mentioned and wrap it up. So.
Yeah, I'm very thankful for this conversation. And John, I'm happy that you mentioned and talked a little bit about the way that we don't pay as much attention to the very people, the very Black women who are in our communities, who continue to carry on our traditions. Oh, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Brother Chavez.
Actually, they are. The guy I was talking to, he was talking about the whole people of the South Pacific. Like they are Micronesian, Polynesian, and Melanesian.
Polynesian, yeah.
Right, Polynesian. So the Polynesian is like when they have all these mixes, and the Micronesians are like they're shorter, and the Melanesian are the darker ones. So I don't know if that's a category they came. I mean, did they created those categories, or was it the Europeans? I don't know, but that's we have that conversation.
Yeah. He also does, Keto Swan also does work on Bermuda as well. So it's interesting.
Right.
But I was going to say, thank you for, bringing to light the way that we have Black women, Africana women in our own communities who continue these traditions, whether knowingly or unknowingly, right? Because we continue to resist, we continue to find new ways to go against the system. Right, because we have to continue to recreate based on the way that the world changes. And so it's interesting. For me, I've always relied heavily on the women in my family, the Black women in my family, and the women who I meet along my journey. So I'm always intrigued by the way we talk about major figures, but there are also everyday people who are part of this struggle as well, that we don't know their names. So we definitely want to highlight the women whose names are unknown, who continue this fight. I don't know if there were any more questions or comments.
I'll go ahead and translate that.
Okay.
Estoy muy agradecida por esta conversación y me gustó como John mencionó a las mujeres negras en nuestras propias comunidades que a menudo no son reconocidas y continúan estas tradiciones y sabiendas o sin saberlo. Seguimos resistiendo, seguimos encontrando formas de luchar contra el sistema. Siempre he confiado en las mujeres negras de mi familia, en las que me encuentro a lo largo de mi viaje. Resalté y quiero resaltar a las mujeres de los nombres que no se conocen, las mujeres así en nuestras comunidades que la gente a lo mejor no conoce sus nombres. Quiero reconocerlas a ellas por la lucha continua.
And Dr. Monroe, I personally didn't want to ask questions about this new Black feminism thing as opposed to Africana womanism. I didn't want to bring that controversy.
That's a whole different conversation.
Oh man, some people get canceled over those things,
Yeah.
But let me tell you this, Dr. Monroe, I'm Africana womanism kind of guy.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. That's self-naming, that is inclusive, it's African, all of that. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to go into uncharted territory for me, but this Black feminism sometimes just sound like a European feminism with a black face sometimes, to me.
You said what? Say it again.
I'm saying that sometimes I just don't want to bring any controversies, but sometimes the Black feminism, it presents to me as a European traditional feminism with a black face.
Yeah.
I just throwing out that there without making too many assumptions or just like a really strong statement, but sometimes it presents to me that way.
Yeah, oftentimes,
I lived in Europe for a long time, so I understand and I know the Northern European feminism because they have a long tradition of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I hear the sisters talking here in the US about those things, or even in the Western Hemisphere, it resembles a little bit that way.
Yeah, and the main issue is labeling our African women prior to these terminologies as feminists.
That's right.
That's an issue. Anna Julia Cooper, Amy Garvey, Claudia Jones were feminists. They never used those terminologies to identify, So those are the real critiques beyond, staying out of the controversy. Those are the real critiques. So.
Well, at first, I hear feminismo negro, right? See, this is Well, that's going to be another conversation tomorrow. But this
Yeah, I would have to come back
Africana
for
woman
that.
is
But I come up from an Africana, tradition. Even though I was in history, I was still trained by scholars in Africana studies, like Dr. Valethia Watkins at Howard University. She taught women's studies, but from an Africana perspective.
Let me see if I can provide some translation of that real quick.
Okay.
El comentario que dice la doctora Monroe, que ya se va a ir, es que no quería traer controversia a la charla porque esa va a ser una charla completamente diferente, pero cuando se habla de feminismo negro, no es lo mismo de hablar del mujerismo. Esa es una traducción muy literal del mujerismo africano, que son dos conceptos diferentes, ¿no? Entonces, el feminismo negro, algunas veces, bueno, es una opinión que yo di, que a veces se presenta como un feminismo europeo que tienen una tradición de feminismo con una cara negra, ¿no? Entonces ella empezó a hablar de algunos autores de que realmente hacen eso, pero también habla de que la concepción o la construcción del mujerismo africano, del mujerismo del mundo africano o africana womanism, es mucho más, antecede estos autores y estos conceptos, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, eso puede ser una charla. Otra charla, that could be another talk, Dr. Monroe, if you have some time, or if you want to come later during the year.
We can do that.
Right, because I would love to have that conversation here, because even like in the country I was born, there's a new movement about that, and sometimes I see a little bit of confusion about these things, and I would really love to hear your take on this.
Absolutely.
Because you're a scholar working on these topics, you know? And
I'm trying to tread lightly because I'm a young scholar, and like you say, cancel culture. So there's the politics of scholarship too, where they control, Black feminists control the production of scholarship and a lot of things. Yeah.
Yes, I know. And I've seen, and I've seen the controversies here, and even in the States, you know, like it gets hot sometimes. So I think the work of scholars like you that shed some light on it from, research, documented, and informed opinions. I appreciate that. There is somebody that has a hand raised. We're gonna close the session, but we wanna honor you desire to participate. Esta es Orica Salas Galán. Yo veo que está su mano ahí. Ya vamos a cerrar, pero queremos honrar su deseo de participar en el espacio.
Buen día. Good morning. I just want to ask. How can we do that the new generation make these mujerismos africanos and not those
Feminismo negro.
feminismos negros that are like blackface and just that, but they are European. So how can we do that the new generation goes through this line and not the other one?
You're connecting from Colombia, right, Erika?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I'm from Colombia.
What was the question? I'm sorry. So how can the new generation
I can repeat it. So she was asking, how can a new generation go for Africana womanism instead of Black feminism, essentially? How do we steer them towards Africana womanism instead of Black feminism?
Yeah, I think the goal is to to be African centered in all things, to be and to teach about Clenora Hudson Weems, and she has a very thorough analysis of what Africana womanism looks like in our everyday lives, in our families, with our husbands, with our children. And so some of these ways we already practice it, right, without ever talking about it. But to steer the youth in this direction, I think is knowing the history of what feminism is, where it kind of derives from, although there are Black women scholars who will say that that's ours, we created that. And so it's just interesting the way that we continue to have the conversation. I think the goal is to let or allow people to name themselves, to name their struggles and their ideology. And that has become the issue, because if I do something on behalf of women's rights, that is not necessarily me proclaiming feminism, right? I'm just saying I'm a part of this struggle. I agree in women's rights. which essentially Black women's rights is African people's rights. And so it's always been inclusive to the entire collective. And so talking about the African collective towards the Black liberation is the best way that we can, you know, steer them towards Africana womanism. And it's not a popular conversation to have. And a lot of people don't know about Africana womanism, mainly due to the way that scholarship has been produced. As I mentioned, John, right? The main books you see are about from a Black feminist perspective. So. There's much scholarship on it. And she just recently, about a year or two ago, published another book on Africana womanism.
Well, Dr. Monroe, know that you're talking here with there's a lot of scholars here, like a lot of the people in the audience, there's educators, there's scholars, professors, the faculty in different countries. So
okay,
this is great, you know, this exchange of knowledge and perspective.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. George, did you take some notes on the
Yeah.
Okay, go
Yes,
ahead.
I did. Entonces, lo que dice la doctora Monroe para responder a la pregunta es que el objetivo es ser africano centrado en todas las cosas, y también de nuevo se refiere a Clenora Hudson Weems, que escribe sobre mujerismo africano o Africana womanism, y también que hay que permitir que la gente nombre sus luchas y ideologías. Dio el ejemplo que sí, porque ella trabaja por los derechos de las mujeres, eso no significa que es una lucha feminista, que para ella es una lucha para gente negra, para gente africana. Y es una conversación que dice que no es muy popular tenerla. Había mencionado antes que mucha gente no sabe sobre el mujerismo africano o Africana womanism, porque la mayoría de los libros son de una perspectiva feminista negra, porque ellos controlan mucho de la academia.
Thank you so much. It's so important to say. I just love the last piece because a lot of spaces are actually colonized and we don't even realize sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let me tell you this, Dr. Monroe, I'm enjoying every piece of it.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah.
I'm an anti, you know, see, I love the war, I love the cultures, but this colonization thing I don't rock with.
It's deep. It's very deep.
And it goes so deep and we don't even realize. Sometimes we've been talking about things to pro the people, right? And we don't even realize it, but sometimes it's from a very colonized space because it's that deep, it's that complex. It is you know, to the colonized mind, it is a constant exercise of awareness, self-consciousness, and really fighting just to get out of that colonized space, because the colonized subject is just not himself or herself.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did mention is that a lot of the women leaders of like Black Lives Matter and other organizations stem from a Black feminist perspective, which, you know, during the time of Claudia Jones and others that I mentioned, they would have never, you know, just solely focused on patriarchy as something to dismantle. You know, you have to dismantle everything that comes with colonialism.
Le estaba diciendo a la doctora Monroe, ya nos estamos despidiendo, que estoy disfrutando cada aspecto, cada momento de esta conversación, porque incluso en algunos espacios de que hay que tener un poco de cuidado, porque la colonización es muy profunda y funciona de maneras complejas, y en algunos espacios incluso que se cree que no, se habla de algunos temas desde como un sujeto colonizado, incluso cuando se quiere hablar en contra de la colonización, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, quería también hacer esa traducción, un poquito, un resumen de lo que dijo la doctora Monroe. Dr. Monroe, we pretty much closing. Thank you so much. You can go ahead and talk to our audience. Just and just say
it was great. It was great. Thank you all for having me. Muchas gracias for listening, you know, and engaging. The questions were amazing.
and know that I'm following you on Twitter.
Okay.
I see you up there. It's like, okay, you're dropping some good stuff now.
Every now and then, you know, it can get exhausting. It can get exhausting.
Yes.
Sante Sana, Dr. Monroe.
Sante Sana. Karibu.
Yes, Madasipa.
Ah, I forgot what I was supposed to say back.
But this is your home. So anytime you wanna come around, wanna come through, you're more than welcome, Dr. Monroe.
Absolutely. I was here for Rashid. I think that's
Baba Kamal Rashid.
yeah, I was here for his. It was really good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So we have people here in the chat, and also, you know, we have the YouTube streaming. Hopefully your message and your knowledge and your work as a scholar reaches more audiences. You got the opportunity to set up or establish networks with people in the diaspora, not only in the US, but also in South America and the Caribbean and Central America.
Wow.
And even, you know, in the continent, you know, we have brother Maximus here from South Africa. There is an Ngumbi also from Congo. He works in Argentina. So, you know, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. I love it. Yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah, Nubia is here. I love Nubia. Nubia was here last Sunday. We had a conversation. She's a great scholar. She's an archaeologist. And you know, I mean, it's just nice. So, you know, if you want people, you know, if you drop your contact information about, because, you know, your Twitter or, you know, even your website, if you want, if they want. You know.
Okay. I know.
Actually
George
posted
was
it
dropping-
earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got all the information. I could post it again.
Okay, please, because I'm about to, you know. Thank you.
Perfect. And before you go, let me share this.
Okay.
You know, here with SEADA, we have a little effort. We are trying to work not only with this platform, but we're trying to create a documentation center or centros de documentación in some neighborhoods in South America. Because for some reason, Dr. Monroe, the Spanish-speaking audience, the Spanish-speaking population or the diaspora, they're not too exposed to this conversation, these concepts, because most of the information goes around in English, in the English language. So there's a huge barrier. So we are trying to close that gap by establishing this conversation between the English-speaking diaspora and the Spanish-speaking diaspora.
Yeah.
Why? If you don't know, the English-speaking diaspora is actually a fraction of what is the Spanish-speaking diaspora. The Spanish-speaking diaspora is way much larger in terms of number.
Mm-hmm.
So in the US, it's only like 50 million, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some people in the UK or something. If you count all the people like Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking diaspora, we are talking about the George, what would it be like 150 million, something like that?
Wow. I think it's more than that. Because like, wasn't Brazil, like Brazil got that alone, I think.
Brazil is like 100, just Brazil.
Right.
Mm.
So we with George, we're a little bit like worried, like with a little bit in an anguish that all this great information is not reaching the diaspora down there. Yeah. So that's one of our goals. That's one of our in our mission to make sure we do that. So having said that, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. George, am I a co-host? Can you please make me a co-host real quick so I can share this?
Yeah, you're a co-host.
Perfect. So I'm gonna share this real quick with you guys. Take a look into this right here. I don't know. Can you see the screen? ¿Pueden ver la pantalla? Yeah. La audiencia, yeah. Perfecto.
Yeah, we see.
I got this poster. So we are creating this Africana Documentation, Cultural and Literary Center. Centros de Documentación Cultural y Literario Africano. Algunos tengo. Aquí está toda la información. This is the whole information there. And I'm just saying this because we're gonna be sending this around in the coming days because I want us to support whatever you can, whatever way you can to support this. You see these two little girls right there? This is two little girls from the Pacific coast of Colombia. Look at the girls and look at the doll they have. I did that on purpose. Miren las niñas y miren las muñecas que tienen. Yo estoy haciendo esto a propósito, porque estamos creyendo construir estos centros de documentación para llenar ese vacío que hay en la diáspora hispanohablante, porque usualmente no tienen acceso a este tipo de información o al trabajo que hacen escolares o investigadores como la doctora Monroe y muchos otros que han estado aquí. Esto lo vamos a hacer a través de una fundación que está en Barbacoas, que se llama Fundación Piernas Cruzadas. Es una fundación liderada por mujeres. So we're doing this in a joint venture with a foundation, with a nonprofit in Barbacoas in Colombia. And it's actually, by the way, it's a women-led organization. And I'm probably gonna follow up with you and I'm gonna give you that information. Entonces, aquí está la información. Oh, perdón. Aquí está la información. brevemente, dice, a documentation center is a volunteer managed resource center that houses African certain film, audio files, literature, scholarly publications, and cultural materials to expose local residents to Black liberatory thought, global African culture, and history. We argue that exposure to such material will change the residents' perception of self and inspire the agency and self-determination needed to improve their living conditions and increase their political visibility. Just for you to have a little, see, that's what we're talking about. So this is just a little neighborhood center, the houses material, so people can probably become more conscious of themselves, more woke, if you want to put it that way, and that translates into their own development and moving beyond, just moving forward. So I'm not going to share this here. I want to share this with you, Dr. Monroe, but I want to share with the whole SEADA community.
Yes, please.
And put that out there. Right? So thank you so much, Dr. Monroe.
Thank you. You all are doing great work. I've truly enjoyed myself. We went over time, but that's okay. It's important. It's important conversations that we're having, and we're building. I think that's the most important thing. And I love what you're doing with that. So yeah, please send that to me.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos y que tengan un feliz resto de domingo. Thank you so much for everyone. Please